We are here for episode number 2 of the CyberEdge. I have two longtime business associates, partners, friends joining me here. Josh Ray and Chris Clark, both over at Blackwire. Thanks for coming on, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Drew. Appreciate you having us on.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So I'm going to go ahead and start with intros like everyone gets. So Josh Ray is the founder and CEO of Blackwire Labs, bringing over 24 years of experience in combating advanced cyber threats across commercial, private, public, and military sectors. As a U.S. Navy veteran and cybersecurity executive, Ray has consistently built and led high-performing teams to protect critical networks and organizations. His career includes key roles at Accenture Security, VeriSign, Raytheon, and the Office of Naval Intelligence, where he drove innovation and built capabilities to defend some of the world's largest organizations against a myriad of advanced cyber adversaries.
That's a mouthful.
It is. I'm impressed by it, actually. Chris Clark, co-founder, CTO at Blackwire Labs, bringing over 2 decades of cybersecurity experience to AI-driven security solutions. His career spans defense, enterprise, and startup sectors, consistently pushing the boundaries of cybersecurity innovation. As a former U.S. Marine and combat veteran, Chris developed a keen understanding of mission-critical security operations. He made significant impacts at industry leaders like Palo Alto Networks, where he founded the Global Security Response Team, and Accenture Security, where he led cyber defense infrastructure efforts. Another mouthful. You like how I read that?
One. And I also created Ninja Jobs, so we'll just go there too.
Chris Clark was the original creator and builder of the first Ninja Jobs platform.
So
way
it
back
all
when.
comes back around. Time is a flat circle.
Very much so. There we go. Well, thanks for coming on, guys. So like we had mentioned so far on the podcast, the topic of conversation has been something that the community has a lot of questions around, a lot of excitement around, and a lot of trepidation to an extent, is the intersection of artificial intelligence and security. At the people level, it's about how is that going to impact their day-to-day jobs? What's going to change? Because let's be honest, change is coming, but what we want to unpack is what that's going to look like, right? How's that's going to affect people that are workers? How's it going to affect leadership? How's it going to affect organizations? Because it's going to affect all of it, right? So with that as kind of the backdrop, that's the route we're going to go. But to lead off, I'd ask, what was the impetus for you guys getting together and starting Blackwire Labs?
I would say that, just to preface the conversation, I think things are going to change. Obviously, they're already starting to change dramatically, which is really one of the reasons why, we started the company. We, took a hard look at, the problems that we wanted to solve in the industry. And, for the past, I would say 2 decades or so, the industry at large has really been faced with this cybersecurity skills deficit, right? The ability to actually bring the right type of capability and skills to an organization when they need them most. And it's one of the reasons why Ninja Jobs was founded is, right? People go to you to find that kind of high-end hard talent to get when they can't get it anywhere else, right? And you guys are, probably some of the best in the industry at doing that. So when we look at the problem, we were like, okay, we really want to tackle this and not just tackle it for the Fortune, 1000, but how can we actually bring that skills and capabilities to the organizations that need it the most, right? That necessarily can't always afford to go out and, source and procure that talent. And then for the organizations that do have that capability in-house, how can we actually really broaden their capability to horizontally as well too? So how can we make the, incident responder, or how can we make the executive or, a security engineer more proficient in the kind of ancillary skills and disciplines, across the whole cybersecurity spectrum? And how can we do it at a way that's actually affordable, to those organizations, because they do sit in the critical supply chain of, many of the Fortune 100 or 1000, organizations that are out there. So, that was probably first and foremost kind of the impetus for driving Blackwire Labs. And then, as we were building that, we really had to make sure that we had focused on kind of the trust and the expertise component of that, and the explainability pieces, all of which now, almost a year and a half later, are front and center issues, for the industry as far as AI adoption as well too. So the good thing is that, the broader hypothesis of, what we started out to do is been proven true. I mean, I credit, Chris and Matt and Bob and many other folks that have kind of influenced a lot of those, initial thoughts. But it really, I mean, at its root, we're really trying to focus on kind of bringing folks up from below that cybersecurity poverty line from a skills capability standpoint.
It's an important thing. So with what I do, I mean, I see it all the time. We've been hearing, cybersecurity skills shortage since 2015, right, as a thing. And whether people want to argue it was a marketing tactic or what ended up coming was that a lot of people thought they were going to get rich at the tail end of what cyber's upswing, went and got certs and didn't have a lot of practical experience and showed up and was like, hey, I'm here to work.
Yeah.
Well, then a lot of people got cut, right? So there's a lot of people out there for sure. I look at tools like yours and others ultimately as force multipliers for high-level practitioners that are going to be able to, what they would normally do, it'll 10x what they're doing personally. Are you seeing that type of adoption yet?
I'd see at the high end, yeah. I mean, you think about it this way, Drew. Like, what do you typically see from like a senior director, kind of mid-level kind of operations manager and security engineer from like a salary standpoint? Like, what's the kind of the range?
So, all right, off the top of my head, a mid-level security engineer is generally going to be, from a salary standpoint, about 140 to 160K with a little, 5 to 10% bonus. If you're looking at a lead, I think like an IR lead or something like that, I'm saying 170 to 190, maybe 200, 10 to 15% bonus. And then the director, senior directors, it's usually 225 to 275 with a 20 to 30%. So you kind of use those as general numbers.
So you think about, we're primarily focused on, state and local organizations in that Fortune 500 to 5,000. They may be able to get one of those folks, right? Like, and they may be able to get, kind of the person that's going to kind of drive the most type of urgency. But by no means, in most cases, are they going to be able to get all three, within the same fiscal year. So, to directly answer your question, like what we're seeing kind of top of the pyramid, yes, it helps people do things that have that skills, those skills faster. But I think more often than not, what we're really seeing is those organizations that, necessarily can't afford or have maybe one or two of those folks on staff, where they're able to leverage the capability to do more essentially with less, right? So to be able to do things where, a CTO of an organization, for instance, that maybe has 2 or 3 IT staff, not very well versed, across the board in security, knows some things, are able to take their product to market and get, all the things aligned from a HIPAA compliance standpoint because they're a health tech client, right? Where they're able to quickly mitigate, things like, an SBOM, or business email compromise kind of targeted attack, and be able to do that in, essentially minutes instead of days or hours, and actually contact the bank before, the payment has been issued. Like, these are the things that we're actually seeing kind of in real world where, the product has kind of proven its value quite a bit. So
that's hyper interesting because, how it was, right, was that a person that was a real high level practitioner, really smart person would lean on, try to diagnose, triage, use nuance to figure out what was happening. And then they got to reach out to the bank and try to get something done. This almost seems like it's taking the place of that to an extent. Is that accurate, or do you think that things are changing in a different way?
Yeah, I mean, I think the industry is changing quite a bit. I mean, Chris, you can speak to this, especially as your experience as a CISO. But what we're seeing is that organizations are able to bring multiple disciplines together, kind of within just some well crafted prompts and some verified response. And obviously, it's important to have those things sourced and things like that. We put a lot of time and effort into. But really, I think, when you talk about time to decision making and time to action, that's really what is improving the most with kind of Gen AI, right? Obviously, there's the adoption pieces that, we should touch on and we should kind of cover down as far as trust and integrity and, explainability of the outputs. But at its root, across the board, whether you're talking about security or even other industries as well, it's the speed to execution and taking out a lot of the things that would overhead types of things that would cause a lot of people time and effort to do. So,
Like what specifically? Like reports and stuff along those lines? And
Potentially, as you mentioned. So as a CISO and previously having built global security organizations, the core tenets, the core accountability areas are not going to change. Those are pretty much mandated at this point by compliance requirements and needs. But all of the operational elements that used to go from everything down to the wire of changing a firewall rule up to creating your policies, updating your policies and the like, all of those are now functionally a mouse click away. Mm-hmm. Once you figure out how you want to interact with the model, how you want to ask the question, what you want to see for an output, it's repeatable and automated. So in that context, you can have one person be able to execute across an area that might have been 5, 10 people before, as long as they have the discernment and the knowledge to assess the quality of the outputs and for them to be repeatable and trustworthy. So you can think about it in the same sense as you might any kind of content creation or any kind of writing or any kind of repeatable task. If your job consists of a repeatable task, it's gonna need to expand significantly, either in depth or breadth, for you to be successful going into the future.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because that brings up an interesting point that a lot of people ask me about is the practitioners, the engineers, the folks that do that type of work, that's their job. Well, there's something much more efficient that's going to be doing their job. How can those people, what skills do they need to start to focus on getting or working on to improve themselves to stay relevant in the cyber workforce?
Josh, you want to give it a shot first?
Yeah, so I would first be kind of think a little bit broadly, right? Think about what their jobs are and what they do from an outcome standpoint, right? And we use the analogy of the early day like SIM, right? So people have had to adopt to new technology, for a while now, right? So early days when SIM came into the environment, the security engineer that was kind of running their own kind of internal tools and log parsers and things, SIM gets introduced. What are they doing? They're basically saying, okay, here's the output of this new tool, and here's the output of my my own internal capability that I've developed, and they're comparing the outputs, right? And then over time, the SIM continues to basically operate at faster speeds. And then that security engineer is now focused on, okay, well, I don't necessarily have to do all of the, log parsing and automation and alert triage. Now I can focus on maybe, how to actually orchestrate those types of things in a security environment. Well, now SOAR comes on board, right? So now SOAR starts to kind of take the place of some of those playbook, automation tasks, and they start to kind of elevate their, practitioner expertise on what's the outcome that needs to occur as a result of all of these things that I used to have to do, manually, now are being done, from an automation standpoint. But they still have to be able to inform those things along the way, right? There still has to be kind of a human in the loop verification component of that. So they've gone from now hands-on keyboard, I've got to kind of do all the, programming of the individual tools. I've got to be able to understand kind of the different workflows. Now they can start to orchestrate kind of at higher order of magnitude and actually use, the wisdom and experience that they've used and learned over the last, 10 or so years to actually kind of drive the technology in the direction that it needs to go, right? And I think, folks that can do that well and start to think about things that of more of an outcome-based standpoint, how can I start to solve bigger challenges using the technology that's, at my fingertips, are going to be the ones that are going to be the most successful going into the future.
I think a core theme that we're going to see both in cyber and more broadly is value is going to come from creativity. So your creativity and the questions that you ask, as well as the depth and breadth of them. So on this lane, I built into Blackwire. It's a proprietary technology called predictive prompting, which will go ahead and give you suggestions for follow-on questions, both at a strategic, tactical, and operational level of how you might want to operationalize or utilize that output. And what that really does is just prompt creativity in a user. We want to start them to ask questions and learn about areas they may not even have considered as being relevant. An example might be you're triaging a vuln, and boom, maybe now you want to actually know how that might impact your CISA compliance, right, or something like that, right? And or inversely, going up or down the stack, you're seeing a threat intel thing, and now you want to know how to actually implement a firewall block in Azure with the command lines, right? Those are areas that, while they seem related, are historically and currently totally isolated from each other in most enterprises. Well, now you live in a world where you're one question away, so there's no way that those jobs can stay separate, and the company or organization can still operate effectively. So they will have to come together, and when that happens, that falls on the question to you, Drew, is what are you seeing insofar as the stated breadth of areas for these organizations, right? Like or these jobs, right? Over the last 10 years, maybe have they gone wider, deeper? What are you seeing from the companies?
What I'm seeing is, so at the line level, I'm seeing less hires for SOC operators and tier one incident response, right? Because I think that's kind of the first thing that, even to your point with SOAR, that could, was alleviated there, and this is kind of the next iteration there. But one of the things that has been an ask for all of the companies that hire for us is someone that they bring in, they want them to be able to not just understand the bits and bytes from a technical standpoint, but they want them to grasp the business use case for cyber, and be able to also, if needed, not that everyone has to, but be able to explain it to a layperson in ways that people can understand.
What you just hit on there is extremely important and absolutely core to the value that Blackwire provides, which is cyber adjacent functionality, right? So here's your output from whatever it might be that's your specialty. Okay, now what do I need to tell legal about this? Or, hey, I need this to be non-tech. Explain this to me for I'm a 5-year-old. And it can do that, right? Because all that's doing is taking the same information and wrapping it. And we call that context craft, if you will, inside the platform. But what it really is applying to the technical acumen and the knowledge of the recipient, that persona. And so that's really interesting that you see that explicitly in those job recs, because absolutely that's the first step into that broader ownership, because right now they're now expected to communicate for the first time with those organizations. But pretty soon you might imagine they might just subsume it, right? And I don't know which way that goes. Is it security subsume? You know what I mean? Like it could go either way.
Chris and I use it to have conversations with each other back and forth. He uses it to dumb down things so I can understand it, and I put it in a way that a Marine can understand it. So
perfect. Yeah. No, that's good.
It does color palettes really well.
Yeah, I like the red crayons.
Yeah,
that's awesome. All right. So let me ask you this, though. Like, why do you think that people are apprehensive about AI coming in? Right? Because it's like it's always changing. Not just AI, but to your point about SIM and SOAR, like the game's been changing since we've been in it. There's always something new. There's always something better. What is it about artificial intelligence as it relates to it that has people being like, what the hell is happening?
They see it as a threat in some respects to their livelihood, right? Folks get pretty comfortable in doing their day-to-day, right? They get comfortable with the tools that they use. They get comfortable with their workflows. They get comfortable with, I come into my job and I do these, 10 things, or this is how I interact with, whatever type of technology or people. And this does represent kind of a fundamental shift in a lot of those things, right? So it is, it's scary, but more often than not, I think it's a huge opportunity, right? You can think about all the things that you can leverage this technology for to make your life better and make you to be more effective. That's a huge opportunity, right? The best analogy that I heard of AI, and I'm going to forget the source, so excuse me on this, but I think it was actually an executive at NVIDIA. He actually referred to AI as like refrigeration when it came out, right? So what did refrigeration allow humans to be able to do? It allowed them to basically store food, for longer periods of time. Well, now they can, they don't have to go out and spend time, hunting and kind of gathering all their food. They can kind of store it, and that allows them to maybe learn a trade, right? But what are the industries that kind of spurred? Refrigeration allowed grocery markets to exist. It allowed for, trucking industries to kind of expand. It allowed for, Anheuser-Busch and Coca-Cola to kind of expand, their business models and kind of get a global reach. So, when we think about, the opportunity that's at hand here and apply that to cybersecurity, it's boundless, right? Like, the next generation of AI savvy security practitioners are going to solve problems that, probably have existed for, the last two generations within kind of the existing kind of security community. I think that the graybeards out there are the ones that, and I put probably myself in that category too. Folks that have been doing this for a really, really long time and have gone through, some stuff. I mean, they have to realize that their wisdom and experience is incredibly valuable, but it's not going to be leveraged in the same way, right? It's going to be leveraged in, how do I actually start to train these models? How do I, do effective source evaluation and triage of the data sets that are being, used to train these models? And then how do I actually verify the outputs, more effectively? And, that's one of the ways that we use our CCOE team. How do we actually think about some of the prompts that need to be created to solve some of these problems? Because that's really where I think that next level of expertise and that kind of collective career wisdom comes in.
Are there any other things that you think those folks that have been in the seat for a while, the quote unquote graybeards, should look at doing to continue to keep themselves relevant?
Just start using AI for everything they do. And I mean that broadly in life. If they're thinking about writing a letter to their mother, it needs to go into GPT-4 or Claude or something to use it first, get familiar with this. This is a technology very similar to a light bulb from a candle. The candle makers were all mad about it too, right? So if you don't start to use it and be familiar with it, because this isn't a question of say, I'm going to get a SIM or I'm not going to get a SIM. It's not about the actual AI application that you're using. I mean, Blackwire is a dedicated AI tool, granted, but Palo Alto's, everything else, it's deep underneath the covers of everything you're doing, from Slack to video communication to transcripts. So all of those things, you need to know how it works and use it and how to get the most out of it. Or quite frankly, it's, you're going to be the candle maker, and it's not a good place to be.
Yeah. I mean, you might be able to carve out a living, as a boutique.
They do smell good. Candles smell a lot better than light bulbs, guys.
Yeah, they do. I haven't found a good scented light bulb yet, but that might be a different business. I think, Drew, the other piece too is when we're thinking about, like, what do those graybeards kind of do? It's really how does it now impact the broader business, right? Like, what can I do from a resource allocation and from a strategic standpoint, kind of to leverage this technology? Do I necessarily need to have a team of 50 doing these types of things, or can I kind of reallocate and kind of reskill some of those folks in areas that now are taking advantage of larger analytics or other types of things that are going to have broader impact within the organization? So it's a good opportunity to kind of just take a step back and look at the organization from a transformation standpoint and say, okay, how do we capitalize on this technology? And the more time they're spent, I think, is being kind of fearful. I think, businesses are going to get left behind. Executives, like senior executives, are already pushing on all facets of business to kind of like, how do we get more profitable? How do we get more efficient? How do we leverage this technology to drive, better business results? The security community obviously is looking at the risk component of that. And rightly so, but they also need to be thinking about, again, within their own particular organizations, How can we leverage this to be most effective? And it's and transform their own internal organization.
Nice. So you brought up something earlier about how this AI is going to change everything. It's going to spur a whole bunch of different things that no one thought of. Have you started to see tangential businesses or opportunities or things pop up from the use and adoption of AI?
Yeah, I got a couple use cases. One actually just yesterday we were talking with one of our CCOE folks and was actually trying to project how the new incoming Trump administration is going to be thinking about some of these different security disciplines, whether it be zero trust or what are some of the kind of the bills that are being brought into adoption or have been adopted as law, and how is that going to be leveraged? And that's not really even a use case that we had initially even thought of. So, to Chris's earlier point, the creativity aspect of, some of these folks as far as how can they leverage not just our technology, but, Gen AI in general to solve or to even get more creative, I think, in some of these problem solving skills. I think the liberal arts type of person is really going to start to make a comeback, where STEM has been, kind of forefront over the last years, just because of the creative thinking component. How do I actually work through different problem sets and use AI to kind of, do things that they didn't necessarily have the skill sets to do before?
There's a school of thought out there that the younger generation that is actually very good at certain types of video games are going to excel in this new environment. Have you seen that?
Absolutely, that's going to be the case. Again, it's about creativity and quick motion, quick failure, quick iteration. So, for example, as Josh was touching on new technologies, new areas, I built an entire area of our platform called Trustwire, which is, roughly 30,000 lines of code, 6 or 7 different programming languages tied together on the blockchain in about 2 months, start to finish, with the support of, including learning an entirely new language, which was React I'd never written before, which had previously used Python primarily. And the reason I mention this is the only thing I needed to know to do that effectively and at an enterprise scale is how to ask the questions for what I wanted to see at a very granular level. It didn't matter that I didn't know the coding language, et cetera, initially. Clearly, I need to know principally like what's happening, right? Because you need to go and change those things. But the same exact thing applies to almost anything you're doing. If you were going to try to build a video in AI or make an image, or in this case for us, triage security events, because you can always ask it what this means, right? So it's a self-help book on steroids while you're doing your tasks. It's just totally something to think about. You could walk completely into something totally new to you. And by the end of the day, if you're asking not only for the answer, but why and how it thought that up, you're going to be an expert at that thing. Or at least passable.
So this is important, actually. Do me a favor. Give us an example when you were going through that process of some of the questions or prompts that you asked and what the outcome was. Because I think that might lift the lid up for some people.
Sure. It's a little hard to do that on the fly because, again, it gets super tech. Actually, before I answer that, I'll say something else. What made that successful was giving it all of the data that it needed to have ahead of time. Okay. So that was everything I thought about, product specs, images of what I wanted to see, copies of other things I'd seen, big descriptions, like super robust descriptions, detailed of like what I wanted to get, because AI is only as good as what it knows, right? So then once that happened, maybe potentially a good example of prompting would be, I'd say, hey, I need this React component to be able to batch in 100 things. I try not to make it too complicated, but to upload 100 things, right? And it would return something that did part of that, right? And then I would ask, oh, I actually need this to be green. We need to make this little bar a little bit longer. And then it would be like 5 or 10 iterations. Now, if I was writing it myself, it would have taken me 100 times longer, and there probably wouldn't have been as many iterations. So instead of spending all the time worrying about the details and the thing, you are instead in this new world, because it takes 0 seconds to get that response. You're asking 100 times, trying it 100 times. And just when it works, and then you know it works, and then you can build on that, and then add that next thing. Like, so add the second floor to the house once you have a foundation that works. And so it's a little bit of a backwards from the way that you used to build code or software or anything really, where you kind of like do this whole thing. Now you just try to build one little bit perfect and then add another little bit perfect. And in that exercise, you learn all of those things because you're the one that's critiquing it, right? Like it's like, oh, that that one's green and it's ugly, right? Or this one's brown and it's not. Like change that. Or this doesn't work when I click on it. So now I know why it didn't work. So I don't know how to bring this back home potentially, but
well, I think
yeah,
I mean
Josh,
the example I think that you provided is really good because it has foundational elements, right? So you started with kind of trusted knowledge that you were using, right? You started with the outcome that you wanted to see.
that's
right?
very important.
And then you also started with the specific kind of core elements of like hey, I want it to be able to do X, Y, and Z, and I asked the right questions. What didn't come into play there was the fact that you didn't know this whole other programming language, and you were able to basically learn that on the fly. So you're almost taking some of the skills component off the table because you're really just thinking about, hey, what's the outcome that I want to achieve? And if I'm basing it on strong and sound knowledge, I've got the level of expertise to at least triage the output and then ask the next best question.
What you mentioned there, and I want to double down on it, which was really, really valuable and right on point, is execution or outcome oriented pieces, right? It's I don't need to, unlike historically, I would like doing analysis of anything, you'd really focus on all the mungy stuff in the middle. Now it's just, okay, here's the output. That output needs to be a little bit different. Give it to me a little bit different, right? And that's just a really big differentiator because people see that and they think, oh, that's 100 hours more work to try to build 10 more prototypes. No, it's 10 seconds more work actually. And the other thing that you mentioned, Josh, that's like that is really, really on point there, I completely forgot. Which was, so I'll throw it back out there if it
no, I mean the other use case, Drew, that we use quite a bit that I think is good is just building a tabletop exercise, for instance, right? So tabletop exercises, typically you need to like have 4 or 5 different types of folks with different expertise. You need an industry expert, you need an offensive person to do some stuff, you need a threat intel person. You're bringing together multiple disciplines to say deliver a tabletop or create the tabletop for a client. We did one literally in 15 minutes. With about 5 or 6 different prompts. And the cool thing is you can, nuance it. So a good example of a prompt, create for me I'm creating a tabletop exercise, create for me a hypothetical threat group that uses AI and ransomware, map the threat group to the diamond model and MITRE ATT&CK, provide a set of TTPs that are, realistic, that align to those technologies. And I want to do this for a health tech client or a state and local type of client. Now, as a former Intel analyst, like way back in the day, it's probably a week to 2 weeks of work. Maybe a really good one can bang it out in a week. And
you just reminded me of what you said before that was super important for anyone getting into this space. When you said output, just like the tabletop exercise, spend half of your prompt telling it how you want the output to be. What bulleted list, 20,000 things, tightly done, markdown format. It's whatever you want, right? Or even upload. If you even upload an existing report and you want to say format like this, that people think would take hours. That's the most trivial thing in the world. It's just doing search and replace, right? So Josh, to your point that you made earlier, it's fantastic. Is prompt is amazing, and then it's the output that matters because it's got to have a mission. You got to give it a really defined mission to be successful.
And as a leader, I mean, if you're good at articulating kind of what you want and what the objective is, and you're able to help, mentor somebody along the way, you're basically, accelerating the value of what you want that person or what you want that technology to be able to do, right? I mean, so from a leadership standpoint, if you're a good leader and you can understand, what those outcomes are and you're prescriptive as far as kind of the type of direction, it's like, I mean, it's a dream come true from that standpoint.
That's cool. Let me ask you this: how do you validate or test in that type of environment? Like once you've created something, how do you know that it works? Is that institutional knowledge that this is what you wanted, or is there an actual tools that help with that?
That's the new, like when we built Ninja Jobs, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was to be able to try to get people with really niche skill sets access to great employers and great jobs and stuff. That's the new niche skill set, is being able to quickly discern if what's coming out is what you want to see, if what's coming out is valid, if what's coming out has problems, because so much of it is seeing what's not there. And expertise comes not from being able to pick apart something that's there, but it comes from being able to see what's missing totally from your policy, or what's missing totally from this report, or what's just totally left field, right? Because that's going to be, I think, the key thing is that discernment, and that's what enables you to start to build that trust and go forward. So
and the way we tackle that is, through pretty rigorous source evaluation on the data sets that we train on, and then we also, I would say, source everything. So the referenceability, right? So somebody that looks at our output, for instance, and we think this is a good model that we're continuing to improve on, can not only through Trustwire attest to the auditability and the data integrity component, because that hasn't changed, right? It's not a missing link. It's not a source that's, just completely been removed, but they can also kind of draw that line between the output that was provided, the question that they asked, and then all the sources that they as practitioners would probably use to actually amalgamate or formulate that type of response as well too. So the transparency aspect, right, combined with the expertise, combined with kind of the data integrity component, is really core to help alleviate a lot of the risks from an adoption standpoint, not only just in a large enterprise, but from a practitioner to be able to say, is this a bona fide response? Do I believe this? And can I actually stand behind it to my boss, to a regulator, to a client? You know what I mean? And that's what's really, I think, key.
That makes perfect sense. And it kind of takes us full circle back to what can people do? What are they going to be? That's it right there, right? The ones that do that. Like my view of how it's going to look in 2 to 3 years, and I'd be interested in both your takes, is that the security practitioner is going to be, there's going to be less, and I say practitioner broadly, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's going to be someone that can control multiple agent level security components, programs,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Agreed.
And the ones that can manage that, do that, has nuance, knows what prompts to do, and can validate it, again, force multipliers. What do you two think?
Because so it's the same as any organization as it gains efficiency, right? Mm-hmm. So when you have a king or whatever, right, it's charge of an empire even, the disputes, like the things that happen below them, as it goes up, there's fewer and fewer of them. So it's only the things that go to the Supreme Court, for example, right, that need now expert review, if you will, like, all the way up and down. Bad analogy, I'm a bit terrible at them. But so it becomes more and more important that you have that expertise and can call bullshit and know all the things, but you're going to do less of that, like over and over again, right? So it's always generally going to be something new that bubbles up. The edge cases are going to make their way to you, right? At whatever level you're at, it's going to be the edge cases of the SOC. Like, we got a new thing. Or, at the CISO level, there's a new regulation. How do I incorporate this? So I think that is going to be the thing. And that's why just being able to discern the output and have good sourcing and have, the trail custody is going to be so important, because you're going to be making decisions on edge cases that you're going to be held accountable for.
Interesting. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, despite the bad analogy, I guess. But
no, I mean, the analogy is terrible. I mean, I've heard you had worse ones. But I think the neat thing is that the practitioner of the future is going to have a lot of these kind of native skills built in. It's like when you give a toddler, an iPad, and they just inherently know how to just use it, right? And they kind of just, so when you're coming into the workforce and how to use, Gen AI types of capabilities to solve problems, they're just inherently going to be able to do things that, we're not even really thinking of right now. And we get some of our, we have two kind of sets of our, not only beta users, we have our CCOE that we collaborate with, quite a bit. We also have a Vanguard group which are kind of folks that are newer to the security industry. And some of the use cases that they come up with are amazing, right? Because,
So good.
they're not constrained necessarily with the way things always have always been done. Kevin's use case, Chris, where he actually kind of transformed, a lot of their vulnerability management capability, was basically able to say like, hey, here's a critical RCE vulnerability that just came across my desk. I've got to be able to, prioritize this. But his client was remote, and his client was, had a lot of different types of infrastructure that, didn't necessarily lend itself from being exploited. He was able to go in basically using Blackwire, put in all the different parameters for both his client's infrastructure and all the kind of key elements across, the CVE scoring and things like that. And was be able to say, hey, this isn't actually necessarily a critical, vulnerability that we need to act on right now. And he was able to stand behind that, and he was able to tell his boss why, which was huge.
As a
But
CISO
that,
and historically,
directly related to cost savings for them in
I
the
think
short.
that point that you made needs to be doubled down on. As a CISO of multiple organizations globally, and having built Palo's response team and all of like everything, like hundreds of thousands of triage things a second, the only thing that matters is having enough information and having something that you can stand on to say this matters or it doesn't. The fact that it doesn't matter is so criminally under leveraged in security, because every security vendor under the sun, they just love to have more and more alerts for everything that nobody cares about, right? Because they feel like if the alerts go down, they're useless. Well, the exact opposite is now the case with AI tools, because they can go in there and actually reason and say, that's not a big deal, don't worry about it. Or worry about it next month, right? Like that thing is the difference, because it's not a false negative, because it can actually say why it doesn't matter. Or like, hey, you don't actually have anything in that Azure thing, so don't worry about it. You don't have Windows involved. Okay, cool, don't worry about it.
And that's
Like,
going to be such a cost savings to people too, to organizations.
That's the thing. That's the blessing there. So it's just, that's a really great point. It's being able to stand on the it doesn't matter.
Well, it's a conversation that we were just having, Chris, with a client, where he was going through and trying to triage, what was going on with this business email compromise and this kind of SBOM attack that was impacting one of his users. His first instinct was, all right, I'll just delete him. But, as he's explaining the scenario in Blackwire, the tone actually changed. And it went from being like conversational and like, hey, I'm here to advise her, to be like very prescriptive, to be like, no, you're under attack. You need to take these specific types of actions. Don't delete the emails. And you need to be looking for within those emails something that's going to change the account information, so on and so forth. That was news to us. Like we didn't even necessarily know that like it had that type of capability. So, the more folks are using these tools to kind of stretch the boundaries of them, the more value I think we're going to end up seeing.
And that customer especially is a really good one to kind of dwell on for a bit, because the persona there is important. So it's somebody that's got a small organization but has a globally applicable SaaS tool that's also regulated in many ways. But they don't have a dedicated security team, nor does anybody these days really need one if they're building a new company from scratch. Mm-hmm. So you've got an individual that's responsible for all the technology, but he's only going to want to look at security when he has to, not when he needs to. Or not all the time. It's not his full-time job. So being able to get that quick insight in the same way that you might have previously had to hire a consultant or something along those lines, it's easy to do. Now flip that around for the people listening that are consultants or that are running those SIs. And the same is true. Now you can do that work that used to take you a week in a couple hours. Now, whether you still charge them for the week or not, that's on you, man. But like, so there's benefit on both sides of that, and just got to see the happy medium.
I think that's the best way to look at this whole thing. Is it's not something that's big and scary and ugly, and it's not going to be the lightning bolt that, eventually it will change a lot of things, but right now not. It's a happy medium, and we want people to embrace that and not be scared of it and make themselves and their companies better. It's simple.
Yeah, the more folks can do right now to kind of expand their, like Chris's point, as far as just using the technology, kind of across the board and familiarizing themselves with it, and then how can they think about, employing that in their professional trade, I think it's going to really just help, right? We talk about education and I was having a conversation with some folks from a local county here, and how many teachers are just so like basically scared of the technology because it's allowing students to write essays and it's allowing students to in their minds cheat, but you give you give them calculators, you give them how, like, from an educational standpoint, like we should be teaching our kids how to leverage this technology to think about how they're actually decomposing the problem that they're trying to solve, and it's the same thing we talk about with security practitioners. Where can we actually use the technology to accelerate kind of the time to value to do those types of things? So some of the things and some of the skills that maybe were traditionally taught, right, like aren't necessarily maybe even needed, or aren't as valuable, right? Like, I'm going to go cook lunch after this, but do I need to go out and like build a fire in the woods to do that? No, right? Like, I'm going to use the microwave, like, because it's available to me, right? So
it's switching from that, just for people, and maybe this is a conversation for another day with education overall, but it seems like it should shift back to less from a regurgitation of information, more of constructive problem solving exercises.
And I think another piece to that too, and this is kind of endemic in the military, so I think that it comes naturally potentially, but accountability now is the most important thing, because so there's no reason now to hire people that are just responsible for repeated tasks, because they don't need to do it if they're just responsible and they're not accountable for it. But if they're accountable for an area, then they can expand their remit as far as they want and potentially get a lot more job satisfaction too, as Josh was talking about, because you actually own the call, right? And that goes all the way down to the bottom. I'm not talking about you having to be a CISO. That could be, instead of just being a triage person that passes something up to a tier 2, no, you're accountable for these types of incidents or these types of things, because it's senseless and it's a waste of organizational funds now to have you just, follow the playbook and move X to Y to B to Z. It doesn't make any sense to do that, because the system, and we all have to eat some humble pie, it's smarter than all of us. It knows more than all of us, and not just about our areas of expertise, but also about everything else in the world that it then can cross-functionally bring into that. So for anyone to try to swim against the river and be like, I'm just going to be better, then it's not going to happen.
Yeah. No, the discernment piece is going to really be kind of key right there, right? Discerning what the output is, how to understand and do proper source evaluation, right? So like understanding, the explainability piece is going to be key. But you touched on something there, Chris. I think, Drew, the folks that you engage with at Ninja Jobs, right, love the mission and they care about solving hard problems, right? And that's what they want to spend the majority of their time doing. And more often than not, what happens is when they get to those organizations, they get inundated with, a massive amount of kind of administrative or other types of kind of stuff. And they ended up spending maybe 20 to 30% of their time on the things that they love and care the most, right? So their job satisfaction goes down considerably, right? And I think with a lot of these, new tools, and, I'd throw Blackwire in there as a kind of an industry kind of vertical expert, capability. That's going to allow them to kind of spend more time on the things that they kind of really care and love about, and solving, again, those big challenges and problems.
Another way to look at that's an equal benefit, right? There's generally going to be two kinds of people you find in the organization: the ones that are going to use that extra time to learn more, do more, et cetera, and the ones that would like to use that extra time to not be at work, right? And the thing is, the world's moving to the place where if we adopt a model of accountability, you're accountable for this. No one cares how long it takes you to do it.
Just get it done.
I want people to work 3 hours a week for me if they do everything I need done at the quality I need it done at, right? Because why would I want them to waste more time? And I think we're seeing a trend in that direction based upon a lot of things broadly, despite some legacy institutions fighting it, tooth and nail, as to be expected. But if we start to move into that place, which I think we will, both of those are equally valuable. If you're passionate about something and you want to spend that time to just become the best and do all that stuff, that's available. If you're not, then work 2 days a week instead of 5, right? But get the same amount done. But that really comes on the employer for the way they're setting up that job. If they set it up to be like you're getting metriced on the tickets you do, it's not going to be good for anyone.
Yeah, right? No, if your job in a large company is like, I'm the expert at the bureaucracy and I can help move you through the bureaucracy, you're probably not going to last long in this next, work environment. But to the folks like Chris was talking about that, really kind of care about, solving big problems or care about, things like family and things like, their own kind of quality of life, which inherently is going to make them better employees. This has a real opportunity to kind of, I think, shape that.
Nice. I agree fully. And I think that's a good place to wrap up. It's a good closing point. I will say thank you so much, guys, for coming on. We will be sharing, for those that are interested, a code for a trial of Blackwire Labs and their products. It's for those that's just audio. It's going to be Ninja Jobs, I believe, with the O being a 0. But we'll flash it up and confirm all that.
No 0, I don't think. But also, let me throw a plug in for you. Working with Drew across now 6 or 7 different companies, this is irrelevant of the fact that I founded founded Ninja Jobs, has been absolutely fantastic. Using them to help staff teams at Palo Alto, Accenture, VeriSign. I think we could use you guys for it too, maybe potentially as well. Still do. Yeah. So absolutely fantastic. Great team, great company, and so thank you too.
Yeah. No. Thanks for having us, Drew. Again, it's it's a privilege and an honor, and to call you both a colleague and a friend. So thank you for that.
Awesome. Thanks, gents. Appreciate it.
Take care. Have a blessed day.
Take care.